Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World, and today we're going to be taking a look at what is going on with the Iran-Israel conflict. And this is, of course, something very, very sensitive in the region as to what has been happening since last Friday. The number of attacks that have been started with Israel attacking Iran, of course, reciprocated also by Iran. A number of lives have been lost on both the sides, with Iran losing a lot of its major leadership and scientists and also civilians. And we've seen that this is something, of course, posing a threat to regional peace and stability, with an all-out escalation also possible. We're going to, of course, also be taking a look at what that means in terms of the way that Israel and Iran are going to continue, and whether or not this can be sustained, and whether or not the Iran-US talks can actually continue moving forward, and what sort of involvement will the US be taking a look at, with Mr. Trump also putting forward serious and strong rhetoric with reference to what is a possibility in terms of US's intervention in the conflict. At the same time, of course, it is important to understand the way that we're going to evolve, and whether or not the calls for action from a number of countries around the world for peace and an end to this conflict will actually result in something or not. We also know that Pakistan's own Deputy Prime Minister has also spoken to his counterparts in Iran, and they have said that this is going to be something that they will reciprocate if Israel stops the attack. And so this is a possibility that exists, but whether or not that will happen and what sort of scenario will that exist in is something that remains to be seen. And for this and more, as of course always in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined online by a guest, Lieutenant General retired Mr. Mohammed Saeed, who's the former Chief of General Staff. Thank you very much, Saeed, for joining us and being a part of our discussion today. And I'll start with you with reference to how you see the situation developing, because of course it's in our neighborhood and it's very, very serious in terms of nuclear powers being involved in the US and Israel involvement, of course, and in the ways that we, of course, see how this is going to develop poses a real escalation. And so beginning from the attacks from Israel to where we see the current situation, first of all, your take on how sustainable this is also from Iran or Israel's side, whether or not this can be something that can last longer, whether or not this is something that Israel is mistakenly looking at as another Gaza, or whether or not there is an underestimation of Iran's ability to sustain these attacks and fire back, and what is the possibility of any dialogue or ceasefire that exists in the current developing situation.
Can you ask somebody to raise the voice a little? You're not audible to me.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right. So, Saeed, my question to you is, how do you look at this current situation with, of course, the possibility of an escalation and all-out war existing? We've seen that this fighting has continued for a number of days now, with Iran also not backing off. And we know that Israel is also continuing with its strikes. We know that there is a lot of potential for this resulting in major regional instability and a threat to the peace situation. What is the possibility of any sort of ceasefire and any potential dialogue in the current scenario?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, and very good night, good evening to, I think Faisal Saab is there and Pitafi Saab is there. This military conflict is getting serious by the day. It has already experienced something which has happened for the first time in the world. Direct attack with most lethal munitions on nuclear infrastructure of a country. There are people who equate the early 80s attack on Iraq's nuclear infrastructure with what has happened now in Iran. Well, that was just a building, and there were no specific capabilities there in the Iraq's plant. But this is a very elaborate infrastructure. There are all instruments, all facets of nuclear program, well dispersed, and at few places like Farrukh and Natanz, these are very deep under the mountains. And as the blame game goes on from the West, that there are stockpiles of uranium enriched beyond 67%, though Iran claims that since 2014-15, they haven't gone beyond 20%. But even then, a direct attack on such facilities are very dangerous for the Iranian people, very dangerous for the region and a very dangerous trend for the international system. Now, where we stand today, there is a strong push, I would say, by the Middle Eastern countries, as we heard from the foreign minister of Qatar today, for a negotiated end to the conflict. Now, this negotiated end to the conflict is being viewed by three principal actors in three very different ways. For example, Iran is now signaling that they would perhaps be prepared to get into negotiations, and negotiations which are aimed at some honorable exit and not the surrender the way the conditions had been laid before the start of this military conflict. US is seeing this the conclusion of this conflict if Iran commits to totally walk away from enrichment of the uranium, means a surrender of their nuclear program, which Iran claims is for peaceful purposes only. Whereas on the other side, there is a very dangerous conclusion being drawn, the end game being interpreted as by Israeli Prime Minister taking out of the supreme leader of Iran. So these are three distinct interpretations of a notion of victories by the three principal actors. Now, reconciling them and coming to something which is acceptable to all three and which also promises an enduring peace, not only between Israel and Iran, but in the broader region, is an uphill task. The formal forums at internationals in the international system, I would say, have taken a back seat, and they have all handed over uh, their principal responsibilities to the President of the United States, and everyone is now looking towards Mr. Trump, what he comes up with, whether he sides with the Israeli Prime Minister and enables him through his direct participation by providing some critical munitions to go deep down in Fardo and Natanz and help him realize his notion of victory, or whether he listens to the voices coming from every direction in the international arena and forces Israel to let US and IAEA proceed with the suspended negotiations and come to some solution which is acceptable to Iran.
Right. Good evening, General Saab. I'm glad that you're here. Good to see you after quite some time. Now, there's a question regarding holding power on both sides. And let us actually delve into the political economy of both sides, particularly Israel. Before this war actually started, Israel had burned through $250 billion worth of money. And now it must be more cash that is being thrown. Their population is also, displaced in the northern and southern borders. And then their economy seems to be downgraded by Moody's as well. Do you think that Israel has the kind of holding power when it comes to this war of attrition? And if that is not the case, will it create some kind of vacuum to suck the US or Western countries in?
Thank you very much for this question. In fact, this is the question which should be considered by everyone who is interested in following this conflict and learning from this conflict. There is a sort of mismatch of the capacities because at the moment it is the military capacity from both sides which is in play, and the Israel's military capacity, their intelligence effort, their ability to have most advanced munitions, most advanced aircrafts, and whatever else is required on a call is not. Iran cannot match that. It is not only Israel who is using their military instrument with all that they produce indigenously. Everything and anything which US is producing is sort of guaranteed to them, and the supply chain cannot be disrupted by anyone. And it's not only the US. When it comes to the intelligence effort, Israel has a very strong alliance, not only with European countries, but unfortunately elsewhere also in the region and beyond. So they on the other side, Iran is, I would say, when it comes to military capacity only, is standing by itself, and when it comes to intelligence support, then here also they cannot rely on anyone else. But there is another very critical difference between the two when it comes to Iranian people. Their pain threshold, their ability to stay united under crisis, I would say is far more superior than Israel. We all have seen for all the ballistics and the cruise missiles fired by Iran. I would say not more than 5 or at best 10% have landed in Haifa, Tel Aviv, and a few settlements in the occupied territories. And you would see the entire Western media rallying behind them, that some civilian targets have been taken on by Iran. Unfortunately, they would turn their face away when Israel, even today, kills 61 poor refugees on a food distribution point in Gaza. Those would not be taken as civilian casualties, but whatever has happened closer to the Ministry of Defense building of Israel in Tel Aviv, that is being propagated world over. So it is my assessment that if Iran continues to hit them even with minimum number of missiles and continues to cause them casualties, it would be very difficult for the Israeli government to sustain it. On the other side, no matter how much bloodshed the people of Iran have to witness and endure, they would stand with their leadership, they would stand with their regime. So, on one side, where there's a mismatch in the military capacity, on the other side, when you take account of what all constitutes the power potential of a nation, most importantly, the psychological element, I think Iran would be able to sustain it for a few more weeks.
General Saeed, thank you very much. Raja Faisal here. Where do we see China standing right now? And especially if we talk about Russia, we know that Iran has been assisting Russia in its Ukrainian war. Can we say that Russia right now, as it is, busy on its western front, so that's why we are not seeing Russia poking its nose in this conflict? And secondly, you might have gone through lots of propaganda which is being cooked by our eastern neighbor India. They are trying to push us and show to the world that we are actually associating ourselves with Iran and we are behind Iran and we are providing all sorts of support to Iran to fight this war against Israel. Can we simply, bust this fake news as well?
I checked whether you can hear
us. General Saeed, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Could you hear Faisal?
I can't hear him.
Not really. Faisal, if you can repeat the question, please.
General Saeed, my question was related to involvement of China. Can we see China playing a pivotal role in this conflict? And what about...
Sorry, I heard your question, but I didn't know that you were directing that question to me. I would take it on. I would try to be very brief, but I will answer it. First of all, in the international setting, in the prevalent international order, when it comes to the global security order, there is no match to US. We have to accept it. We have been witnessing this debate of global power contestation, in which the issue of unipolarity now transitioning to multipolarity or at least bipolarity has been there for the last 4 or 5 years. But within the overall global setting, when you specifically talk of the global security order, in that Russia and China, as of today, are not closer to US. Why? Because US has, with most sophisticated technologies, their military deployed at 765 bases world over, in all oceans, in all continents. They can reach to any conflict zone, or they can get into any conflict in matter of days and at places in matter of hours. On the contrary, where is Russian presence and Chinese presence militarily with most lethal technologies beyond their boundaries, beyond their geography, we all know that. So it is very difficult for China and Russia to go beyond diplomatic sphere to influence the conflict which we are witnessing. We've had a case where in 2014-15 in Syria, for example, when Iranian-backed certain forces and the regime were getting cornered, the Russians intervened militarily, and the equation changed within a matter of weeks. But Russia is no more in position to do that. And neither at UNSC, at any other international forum, China or Russia have gone beyond urging the US, beyond urging the international actors to persuade both sides coming back to negotiations, de-escalate the situation, means the conventional and traditional statements. Russia, for a moment in UNSC, spoke very strongly. They did say that it is. They strongly condemned the unprovoked aggression by Israel, and they also said it is unacceptable. But Chinese position, as traditionally, they rely on very nuanced positions. It wasn't beyond that. But today, what President Xi has said is very significant. He has sort of given his take on what direction the international system would take from here on. But that is something for which we all have to wait and see. Now, coming on to the propaganda which is being done by, particularly by the Indians and Indian media and their Twitter handlers, whoever are coming up with the fake news items like Pakistan is providing missiles and intelligence support, and they're listing many other things also to the Iranians. Well, they are being fed this by their intelligence agency, and this is at best kiddish, because at the moment, US, Israel, and their allies have complete visibility, complete transparency of the battlefield within the Iranian geography, and they also have complete visibility of the waterways around Iran. So anything going there or anything coming there will be noticed by them, and whatever Indians are trying to do with an intent, in their opinion, which would malign or drag Pakistan in this conflict, would fail and would fail badly.
Right. General Saeed, when we talk about what you've earlier mentioned in terms of how Iran will be able to sustain at least another couple of weeks, I want your take on the kind of options that Iran has in the possibilities of the US directly intervening in this conflict. Is there a possibility of Iran attacking US military bases in the region with countries that it's friendly with, and also with reference to other measures that the Iranian side can take, such as the Strait of Hormuz, or any other actions that can be taken, which can also, of course, add to the regional conflict in support of their own defense, of course.
General Saab, this question is very critical right now, because at the G7 summit, President Trump actually walked away and has gone back to the Situation Room, and it seems there is a high-stakes meeting that is going to take place later tonight.
Okay. President Trump has tweeted, I don't know whether from the Situation Room or after the end of the meeting, and in essence, his both tweets just minutes back, he said, A, we know where is Iran's supreme leader hiding, and we're not going to kill him so far. That is, thus far, we will not. And the tone in both the tweets is very threatening, and asking them to surrender, sort of come to their terms, and the terms which I've already spoken about. Iran is not going to take that. Now, as far as US involvement in the conflict, direct involvement in the conflict is concerned, as it is being propagated by the West, because when everything being used by Israel is being provided by the US, so direct involvement is already there. But as of today, a more direct involvement is being interpreted as, for last 2 days, Israeli Prime Minister has said that this war can end the moment US decides to end it. And what he's saying is that we have not been able to reach to the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, which is beneath the mountains. We've taken down buildings, we have struck some infrastructure which was over the surface, but whatever was critical is beyond our reach. So you come in with those critical munitions, with the daisy cutters, with the bunker busters, and you take out those capabilities and then get Iran to the negotiations.
So, General Saeed, you have earlier mentioned.
General Saeed, please continue.
It is very difficult to predict what will US do on this, but it would be a very unwise step if US goes on this route. Why? Because the moment they do it, then the Iranian leadership had very clearly said, although they didn't say it, they didn't repeat it after the start of the conflict, but before the start of the conflict, they had very clearly, the Supreme Leader and the President said that if we are attacked, we will take on US bases in the region. So if this happens, that US uses against Iran their critical munitions on the nuclear facilities, then this war is not going to remain a war between Israel and Iran. It will spread in the region and it will be very dangerous. Coming to the second question of disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, well, IRGC's naval component in the yesteryears had a good capacity to do that. Where is that capacity now? To what extent it has been degraded in the during the first day? I have absolutely no information about that. But if Iran decides to expand the war, which will have its political cost, which will have for them its diplomatic cost also, they will be able to do it in Strait of Hormuz. That will be very dangerous for the entire international community.
Yes, Faisal, you had a question for General Saeed.
General Saeed, earlier you have highlighted that, of course, world is fast heading towards multi-polarity. In this whole scenario, when we are listening to the statements related to when it was Gaza, they were saying everyone has to vacate Gaza. Now they are saying everyone has to vacate Tehran. So this world order, do you think that it has no standing in the world, and world should be looking for a new world order that of course shows a bit of balance of power when it comes to multipolarity? And if this continues, then do you see a future of United Nations?
Well, this term world order is interpreted in many ways, particularly on media. But academically, the world order means how is the world structured to regulate economic, security, trade, political, and other host of other issues between the nation states. And we essentially are today in the post-World War II world order because the structures are the same. But this conflict, these structures, all of these structures, whether it be UNSC, whether it be UN, whether it be IAEA, whether it be SWIFT, when it comes to responding to all nation states on equal footing, they were absolutely nowhere near that principle. And they were sort of on ventilators, and they've died through this conflict. Their credibility has absolutely eroded. Now, it is the one man who calls the shot. It is G7, it is UNSC, everybody has debated, and finally everyone is looking toward the President of the United States of America to bring this war to an end. So what does this mean? This means brute, I would say naked manifestation of realism. And all of us, particularly those in the Muslim world, have to realize that unless you grow internally, unless you grow in the hard power and soft power both, you would remain at the mercy of a system which can be twisted, manipulated in any directions for the interest of the superpowers or their allies. So neither Iran or anyone else in the present era who's facing a conflict or military aggression should expect much from the prevalent world order. Now, whether this is transitioning to a new arrangement, absolutely not as of today. And when it comes to multipolarity, in my humble judgment, whether the economic center of gravity might be transitioning towards east, but when it comes to the global security order, there is only one sole superpower, and that is the US.
Right. General Sahib, it is fortuitous that you have actually mentioned the importance of Muslims actually strengthening their own capacity as well. But there is a very interesting dichotomy. On one side, we keep on talking about bloc politics. Blocs are important, OIC is important, but of course, there are so many nations within it. On the other side, then there is the matter of national interest of each country. Every country pursues some kind of strength or some model of strength. But how does it equate when they all come together, whether they can come together? That is one question. There's second question regarding security implications for Pakistan if this war continues for a longer period of time, especially because we actually share a long border with Iran, and then of course we also have ethnicities which are divided between the two countries, and religious majorities also, sir.
And also, General Saeed, the possibility of Indian elements being also involved in this potentially later on in a case of escalation for Pakistan.
Now, first of all, being a Muslim, let me say it with a lot of pain. The concept of Ummah as understood and interpreted in many Muslim societies, particularly in Pakistani society, is illusionary at best in the prevalent times. Either it's not there, and if it is there, it is on the pulpit of mosques only. If somebody thinks that in few years' time there is going to be some alliance, some arrangement, some block of the Muslim nations, and it is going to deliver the individual nation states in the 57 Muslim countries out of their difficulties, it's a far-fetched idea. Had it been a possibility, OIC would have done it by now. So what is the requirement? The requirement is all nation states must invest far more in education, in research and development, and in where they face threats, in accumulation of a hard power. The best way to avoid war has always been be prepared for war. And be prepared for war while ensuring that you are at par, if not a step beyond, at least at par with what is coming on you. And any nation state, particularly the Muslim states who are facing any sort of threat to their national security, have to live up to the dictates of this principle. Now, if this war continues, there are going to be implications for everyone in the world. If the prices of fossil fuels shot up by 7-10% on first day, the prices of LPG, the prices of all other energy resources are going up. And the moment there is one odd disruption in the Strait of Hormuz or at the hands of Houthis in the Red Sea, you will see what happens. The international community suffered a supply chain disruption in COVID. We all know that if any vessel which is taking the route of Persian Gulf, then Red Sea, Suez Canal, Mediterranean, and then onwards, if this is disrupted, it delays every vessel for 2.5 to 3 months. So there is going to be very serious issue with this global supply chain if that happens. Specifically for Pakistan, we know that we have our own economic difficulties. The macroeconomic stability is now indicating good things to come in future. But if the prices of oil keep going up, then we will have to maybe revisit a lot of things which have just come up in the budget. And secondly, if Israel keeps hitting city after city, both Afghanistan and Iran, and both Afghanistan and Pakistan might experience what we experienced in the 70s in the influx of Iranian people. And another very critical factor that all along the border belt between Pakistan and Iran, the local economies, the local sustenance is integrated. And without going into the details, if that sort of integration doesn't live up to the routine practices, then you will find people living in our border areas facing a lot of difficulties.
Saeed, as a conflict scientist, you must have seen the very recent conflicts, of course, one in between Pakistan and India and this one. Can we say that air's priority, attaining the air's priority is the first checkmate any party can, of course, take? And the second one is that you have to have a missile muscle that can alert and that can disrupt chaos in the enemy country. But first of all, to start with, of course, one has to have the air's priority. That is pivotal.
Well, there are no two opinions about it. Since World War II, air has played a dominant role world over. And for last about 10, 12 years, since we are talking of this revolution, I would say, in warfare, this is through niche capabilities, getting into non-contact warfare. What was between India and Pakistan, the recent episode, was also non-contact warfare. And this is also essentially non-contact warfare. But you see, if you cannot have an air instrument which can earn you air superiority on the day of battle, war, you got to have some sort of compatibility. Now, Iran, despite enviable resolve and commitment and great people, the problem they have at hand is a mismatch in both the air forces. The Iranian Air Force, though they have about 400 aircrafts, of which 200 are about 200 of them are basically helicopters and transport aircrafts. And the remaining 200 are what? F4s, vintage of 50s, F6 vintage of 60s, and F12 and 14, again, vintage of late 60s. They're not a match to F35, F15, and F16, being employed in waves of dozens and dozens, 3-4 times every day by Israel. So air is a very critical asset nowadays in the sort of warfare we are in. And when it comes to the importance of propaganda, the importance of creating chaos through information warfare, in the not only in the ranks of opponent but in the society also, was always there for millions of years. It is now there with very sharp tools which can create narratives, change narratives, create perceptions, change perceptions in real time, in matter of minutes. So that capability again is very, very critical. And since Iran is standing alone, on the other side, Israel is being supported by, I would say, I have no doubt, by every intelligence agency of the West. So they are again facing a difficulty in this very critical capability.
Right. General Saeed, when we speak about, of course, what we're experiencing in terms of misinformation, as you pointed out multiple times, is very, very essential, because a lot of that has also been targeted against Pakistan or Pakistan's involvement, or the fact that nukes will be involved, or that these alleged claims that, of course, are fake in terms of what Pakistan's response or support to Israel will be in terms of nuclear, to Iran would be in terms of nuclear weapons. And so I want your take on how much of this, when we also talk about AI-generated video of even Mr. Donald Trump, is contributing to the ways that the international community is really looking at this current situation with the kind of sort of historic picture painting of Iran that has existed from the US's or Western side in particular, how much of that is getting impacted at the current moment in the ways that nuclear weapons or the potential nuclear capability of Iran that is being put forward as rhetoric from the US is contributing to how people are sympathizing or not with Iran?
And General Sahib, could you also speak to Sana's earlier question regarding India potentially exploiting this situation to do something negative towards Pakistan?
No, second question first. You see, India has seen with us from 6 to 10 May onwards that they are not militarily in a position to take on Pakistan. They cannot overwhelm, they can't even compete Pakistan Air Force. And in the spectrum of electronic warfare, in the spectrum of niche capabilities like missiles, drones, at places we have edge, at places we are at par. They've also exhausted a lot of their stocks in those 4 days. And such capabilities cannot be rebuilt overnight. One. Secondly, India should not equate itself with Israel or US. While Israel and US, although they have taken more than a couple, I would say a couple of decades to shape an opinion about Iran, which is now very well accepted in the West, whether we like it or not. So India would have to shape international environment in their favor for use of military instrument. They did it last time without creating any legitimacy for their accusations toward Pakistan, and you know what they face and what they're facing till today. So immediately, for them to undertake any misadventure, I would rule it out. Now, secondly, about the rhetoric about Iran getting nuclear weapons. Again, I say it with a lot of pain. In complete Europe, in America, at every strata of the society and at the leadership level, at the institutions level, people think that Iran is an existential threat to the survival of Israel. They believe on Israeli narrative. In last 10 days, wherever an Israeli envoy or their leader or anyone who has appeared, whether at UNSC or IAEA or any other Western capital or a media house, the first thing they say is that Iran has declared that Israel does not have the right to exist on planet Earth. They quote Imam Khomeini's statement of 1982 that he said Israel is a cancerous tumor and has to be taken out of the world body politic. Now, with such statements, which they have repeated for last 20 years everywhere, they have now created a narrative that people accept in the West that yes, they are doing in what they're doing, it is in self-defense. On the other side, Iran's narrative, though, is crafted on solid grounds. They have cooperated with IAEA and with the West for last 20 years, more than any other nation state in the world, for giving visibility of their installations, of their program, for allowing interactions with their scientists and the community and those people who are involved in their program, for continuous inspections and everything. Yet their narrative is not believed. So what is the lesson here? The lesson is for nation states, particularly for the Muslim nation states, when people in important positions make statements on sensitive issues, they got to see them through and see what would those cost in future. So Israel is now hiding behind successfully those statements which have come from Tehran for last 30, 35 years. And they have been able to create a narrative, and they're now doing whatever they're doing while hiding behind that narrative.
General Saeed, when it comes to intelligence, can we consider that it was an utter counterintelligence failure at the part of Iranians to start with the war? because one after another, their leadership, military leadership, and the scientists, they got, of course, eliminated by the Israelis. And Israelis are boasting about it that they have the ground intelligence, minute-to-minute ground intelligence, and of course, they have all sorts of intelligence. Can we say that since a long time, as we know, that India was having a good relation with Iran, in the guise of that economic relation, both of the countries, of course, they were having, and in the guise of they doing business from Chabahar port, especially Shahid Bahishti terminal, it actually is in the hands of Indians. Can we say that India, especially Indian Navy, having a track record of spooking around, especially Qatar example is in front of us, when 8 of their officers and JCOs, they were caught red-handed by Qatari authorities as well. They were found spying for Mossad. In this whole episode, can we say that Indians could be figured out hiding somewhere in the guise of businessmen like Kulbhushan Jadhav, in the guise of many more sailors and all, they have been spying for Mossad against Iran?
And General Sahib, I'm not going to ask you to actually psychoanalyze whatever is going on in India, but I want your comment on this pathology of Islamophobia that seems to have actually overwhelmed India in such a way that they don't mind actually going against a country like Iran, which has actually cooperated a lot with them.
Okay. Now, first of all, the Mossad's penetration in Iranians' state apparatus, their armed forces and their society, has been a setback for Iran. And has been a setback because it is not Mossad alone. Every Western intelligence agency, I can assume it, are supporting Mossad. Every intelligence agency of the West. And they have not been supporting during this conflict. They have been supporting them for years. And this is years of work which gave a sort of surprise on the day one of conflict, which you are talking about and which we've all witnessed. Iran would find out the voids, and Iran would address those voids as quickly as they can. I'm confident about that. Coming about India-Israel nexus, this is something very, very important. You see, at the moment, it's not a political or economic alliance. So it's not a partnership for defense production and collaboration, etc., etc. Basically, Israel and India are ideological partners. The mindset of their two leaders, the hate these two leaders have towards Islam, Muslims, and any Muslim nation state which is of consequence. These two leaders have, I would say, they're twin brothers when it comes to that ideological plane. They are guided by hate towards Islam and Muslims. They sleep with hate towards Islam and Muslim. They wake up with sleep and hate towards Islam and Muslim. What is happening internally in India, when we comment on it, it is taken as propaganda. So anyone who is listening us and is interested in knowing what is the treatment of BJP's government since 2014 towards Muslims and what turns and twists their democracy has experienced, they should Google one sentence: what is the status of Indian democracy today? And they will find not hundreds, thousands of pieces which are very critical and which are saying openly that it's no more that secular and inclusive India, a tolerant India. It is now India which is extremely polarized, which is internally dangerously discriminating, and which is externally hyper proactive in their foreign policy. Expansionist, revisionist, and hyper proactive. It has consequences not only for Pakistan, but entire region. And you do a reality check today, what sort of relationship they have in the neighborhood, you will find it's not only Pakistan with whom they have the trouble. But Pakistan, after what Pakistan has done in those 4 days of May, should be confident and should be and the people of Pakistan should be very assured of their armed forces capacity to handle what comes from India in future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, General Mohammed Saeed, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate as always. That's all that we have time for now. See you tomorrow.